The sun hung merciless in the cloudless sky, beating down on the barren stretch of land that Jake Sullivan now called his own. 25 years old, with calloused hands and dreams bigger than his pockets were deep. Jake stood at the edge of his newly purchased property, squinting against the harsh glare that reflected off the scattered rocks and sparse vegetation. $35. That's all it had cost him. Every cent he'd saved from 2 years of breaking horses and mending fences on other men's ranches. The deed crinkled in his pocket as he surveyed his kingdom of dust and stone. It wasn't much to look at. 40 acres of what most folks would call worthless desert, situated at the edge of Arizona territory, where even the most optimistic settlers had given up trying to coax life from the unforgiving soil. But Jake saw something different. He saw possibility in every sun-bleached boulder, potential in every scraggly mesquite tree that somehow clung to life in this hostile place. "You're a damn fool, Sullivan," Old Pete had told him back at the land office in Tucson. The grizzled clerk had laughed outright when Jake counted out his savings on the counter. "That patch of hell ain't worth the paper it's written on. Nothing out there but scorpions, rattlers, and the ghosts of men who tried before you." But Jake had simply folded the deed, tucked it safe in his shirt pocket, and tipped his hat. "Well then, I reckon I'll have plenty of company." Now, standing on his own land for the first time, he understood why the previous owner had been so eager to sell. The landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, a sea of ochre and rust, punctuated by the occasional saguaro cactus standing like a lonely sentinel against the horizon. To the north, jagged mountains rose purple and forbidding, their peaks lost in the heat shimmer. To the south, the land rolled away in gentle swells toward Mexico, each ridge revealing more of the same unforgiving terrain. Jake led his horse, a sturdy bay mare named Rosie, toward what the deed described as improvements, a generous term for the ramshackle structure that barely qualified as a shelter. The cabin, if it could be called that, consisted of 4 walls of sun-dried adobe, half melted back into the earth from which they'd come. The roof, made of precious timber that must have been hauled from God knows where, sagged in the middle like a broken-backed mule. One window, or rather a hole where a window should have been, stared blindly out at the desolate landscape. "Home, sweet home, Rosie," Jake muttered, running a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. The mare snorted, as if sharing his assessment of their new circumstances. Inside, the cabin was even less promising. Sand had drifted through the cracks in the walls, creating miniature dunes in the corners. The previous occupant had left behind a broken chair, a rusted potbelly stove with a hole in its side, and what might have once been a bed frame but now resembled kindling more than furniture. Mouse droppings and the shed skin of a snake decorated the dirt floor. Jake set his bedroll in the corner that seemed most structurally sound and began the slow process of making the place habitable. As the afternoon wore on, the heat became a living thing, pressing against him from all sides. He worked steadily, sweeping out the worst of the debris, checking the walls for scorpion nests, and patching the most egregious holes with the mud from the nearly dry creek bed he'd spotted a quarter-mile away. By sunset, he'd managed to create something that might generously be called a camp inside the cabin. The broken chair, reinforced with rope, served as his only furniture. His saddle became a backrest, his bedroll the only comfort against the hard-packed earth. He'd found enough dry mesquite to start a small fire in a circle of stones outside, the stove being useless until he could patch that hole. As darkness crept across the land, the temperature plummeted. What had been insufferable heat became a chill that cut through his worn jacket like a knife. Jake huddled close to his fire, cooking a meager meal of beans and hardtack, listening to the night sounds of his new domain. Coyotes yipped in the distance, their calls echoing off the mountains, closer. He heard the rustle of small creatures, kangaroo rats and lizards going about their nocturnal business, and underneath it all, the vast silence of the desert. A quiet so complete it seemed to press against his eardrums. "What the hell have you done, Jake?" he asked himself, staring up at the brilliant canopy of stars. Out here, with no town lights for 50 miles, The Milky Way blazed across the sky like a river of diamonds. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, all that emptiness above matching the emptiness around him. He thought about the ranch he'd grown up on in Texas, green and lush compared to this moonscape, his parents' graves, side by side in the family plot, the bank notice, polite but firm, that had sent him west with nothing but Rosie and the clothes on his back. This land, this $35 gamble, was his chance to build something of his own, to prove that Sullivan grit could triumph where others had failed. The first night was the longest. Every sound made him reach for his Colt .45. Every shadow could be Apache raiders or Mexican bandits or any of the dozen dangers that stalk the borderlands. He dozed fitfully, starting awake when Rosie snorted or stamped, wondering if he'd wake to find his throat cut or his horse stolen. But morning came, as it always does, painting the mountains pink and gold. Jake emerged from his cabin, stiff and sand-covered, to find the landscape transformed by the early light. What had seemed dead and colorless the day before now glowed with subtle beauty, the red rocks burning like embers, the distant peaks purple as bruises, the sky a blue so pure it hurt to look at. He spent that second day exploring his property, leading Rosie on foot to spare her in the heat. He found the borders marked by cairns of stacked stones, probably set by some long-ago surveyor. The creek bed, mostly dry, showed signs that water flowed during the rare rains. There were game trails, narrow paths worn by javelinas and deer, proof that life could exist here. Best of all, he found a spring tucked into a cluster of rocks on the northern edge of his land. Not much more than a seep, but genuine water, clear and cold. "We might make it after all, girl," he told Rosie, letting her drink her fill from the natural basin below the spring. It was on the third day that the neighbors came calling. Jake heard them before he saw them, the creak of wagon wheels and the jingle of harnesses carrying clear in the still air. He stood from where he'd been trying to repair the cabin door, shading his eyes against the sun. 2 riders approached, followed by a buckboard wagon, the lead rider, a man in his 50s with a face like old leather and eyes the color of flint, reined up just outside what Jake supposed was his yard. "You the fool who bought the Murphy place?" the man asked without preamble. "Jake Sullivan," Jake replied, neither confirming nor denying his foolishness. "And you are?" "Tom Brennan. I own the Double B north of here." He gestured vaguely toward the mountains. "This here's my son, Will, and that's Mrs. Hutchinson from town. Come to see what kind of damn fool pays good money for bad land." The woman on the wagon seat, dressed in black despite the heat, looked him over with the calculating gaze of a frontier matron who'd seen too many young men die trying to prove themselves against this unforgiving country. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, her voice carrying a hint of Irish brogue. "I run the general store in Coldwater Springs. That's the nearest town, such as it is, about 20 miles east. You'll be needing supplies. I expect—" "Yes, ma'am, I expect I will." Brennan spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Boy, I've been ranching this territory for 20 years. Seen dozens like you come and go. This land don't forgive. And it don't forget. Murphy lasted 2 years before the drought of '78 sent him packing. Found him half dead from thirst, babbling about Apache ghosts and cursed water." Jake met the older man's gaze steadily. "I appreciate the warning, Mr. Brennan, but I've got my reasons for being here." "Calm. Reasons don't mean shit when you're dying of thirst or getting your scalp lifted," Will Brennan interjected. He was about Jake's age, with his father's hard eyes, but none of the old man's weathered wisdom. "Apache been pushing north again. Army can't keep him on the reservation. I'll take my chances." Mrs. Hutchinson made a sound that might have been approval or disgust. "Well then, Mr. Sullivan, when you come to town, if you last that long, I'll extend you credit for the first month. After that, cash on the barrelhead like everyone else." They left as abruptly as they'd come, Brennan pausing only to deliver one final warning. "That spring on your north boundary, it's been known to draw unwanted attention. Apache consider water sacred in this desert. You might want to keep that Colt handy." Jake watched them disappear into the heat shimmer, their visit leaving him feeling more isolated than before. He'd known it wouldn't be easy, but the casual certainty of his failure in their voices rankled. He returned to his work with renewed determination, driving himself despite the heat. As the sun began its descent on that third day, painting long shadows across his dusty kingdom, Jake Sullivan stood in the doorway of his patched-up cabin and allowed himself a moment of pride. It wasn't much. Hell, it was barely anything, but it was his. Every board nailed, every hole patched, every rock moved was a tiny victory against the odds. The desert wind picked up as darkness fell, whistling through the gaps in his walls and carrying the lonely sound of coyotes. Jake checked his rifle, made sure Rosie was secure for the night, and settled in for another long vigil. Somewhere out there in the darkness, Apache raiders moved like shadows. Somewhere, other men's cattle grazed on better land. Somewhere, people slept in real beds in real houses, never knowing what it was like to gamble everything on 40 acres of nothing. But this was his 40 acres of nothing, bought and paid for with sweat and hope. As he drifted off to sleep, Jake Sullivan's last thought was of the spring on his northern boundary, flowing clear and cold despite the drought, despite the curse, despite everything. Water in the desert meant life, and life, no matter how hard, was what he'd come here to build. The nightmare, as the locals would later say, hadn't even begun. The afternoon sun slanted through the sparse mesquite trees, casting dappled shadows across the rocky ground near the spring. Jake had been working since dawn, hauling stones to build a better catch basin for the precious water. His shirt clung to his back with sweat, and his hands were raw from the rough rocks. But he worked with the steady rhythm of a man who'd learned that survival meant never stopping. It was Rosie who alerted him first. The mare's head shot up, ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring as she tested the wind. Jake straightened slowly, his hand moving instinctively to the colt at his hip. In 3 weeks on his land, he'd learned to trust the horse's instincts more than his own. The silence was absolute, too absolute. Even the ever-present buzz of insects had ceased. Jake's eyes scanned the scrub brush and scattered boulders, looking for movement, for anything out of place. The hair on the back of his neck prickled with the feeling of being watched. Then he saw them. 3 figures huddled in the shadow of a large boulder near the creek bed, about 50 yards from where he stood. At first, he thought they were children. They seemed so small. But as his eyes adjusted to the shadows, he realized they were young women, Apache, by their dress and long, dark hair. Jake's mind raced. Apache women alone. This far from the reservation? It didn't make sense. Could be a trap. Warriors might be hidden in the rocks, using the women as bait for foolish white men. His fingers tightened on the grip of his pistol, but he didn't draw. Not yet. One of the figures moved, trying to shrink further into the shadows, and Jake caught a glimpse of torn fabric, of what might be blood on bare feet. The defensive way they huddled together spoke of fear, not strategy. These weren't decoys. They were running from something. "I know you're there," Jake called out in Spanish, the trade language of the frontier. His voice echoed off the rocks. "I'm not going to hurt you." No response. The figures remained frozen, but he could see the tension in their bodies, coiled like springs ready to bolt. Jake slowly raised his hands, showing empty palms. "Water?" He gestured to the spring. "Agua." The smallest of the 3, she couldn't have been more than 15 or 16, shifted slightly. Even from this distance, Jake could see the desperation in the movement. How long had they been without water? Making a decision that old Pete would have called suicidal. Jake unbuckled his gun belt and set it on a nearby rock. He took his canteen, made sure they could see it clearly, and walked slowly to a midpoint between them. He set the canteen on the ground and backed away. "It's yours," he said in Spanish. "Take it." For long moments, nothing happened. Then the tallest of the 3, perhaps 20 years old, emerged from the shadows. She moved like a deer ready to bolt at the slightest threat, her dark eyes never leaving Jake's face. Her dress, once white cotton, was torn and stained with dirt and darker substances Jake didn't want to identify. Her feet were indeed bloody, wrapped in makeshift bandages torn from petticoats. She reached the canteen and snatched it up, backing away quickly. But instead of running, she returned to the others, helping the youngest drink first. The third girl, who appeared to be in her late teens, seemed barely conscious, supported between the other two. Jake's suspicions of a trap faded as he watched them share the water. No Apache warrior would use women in this condition as bait. These girls were truly desperate, truly alone. But how? And why? When the canteen was empty, the oldest girl looked at him again. She said something in Apache, which Jake didn't understand, then tried Spanish. "More?" Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. Jake nodded toward the spring. "There's plenty. Come." He saw the war in her eyes, trust battling with survival instinct. Finally, necessity won. Supporting the semi-conscious girl between them, they emerged fully from their hiding spot. In the clear afternoon light, their condition was even worse than Jake had thought. Bruises marked their arms and faces. Their feet left bloody prints on the stones. The middle girl's breathing was labored, and she seemed to drift in and out of awareness. Jake kept his distance as they made their way to the spring, letting them drink their fill. He retreated to his cabin and returned with his meager food supplies. Hard biscuits, dried beef, a few withered apples from Mrs. Hutchinson's store. He set these on a flat rock and backed away again. The oldest girl looked at him with something like confusion. "Why?" she asked in Spanish. It was a fair question. Why was he helping them? Apache raids had killed plenty of settlers. The army shot Apache on sight sometimes, women and children included, claiming they couldn't tell combatants from non-combatants. Most of his neighbors would have ridden for the fort at the first sight of these girls, bringing soldiers to round them up or worse. "You need help," Jake said simply. "That's reason enough." As they ate, slowly, carefully, like people who'd been starving, Jake's mind worked through the implications. These girls were running from something, or someone. Their condition suggested they'd been held somewhere, had escaped. The nearest army fort was Fort Buchanan, 2 days' ride south. The Apache reservation was even farther. Where had they come from? The sun was beginning to set, painting the mountains blood red, when the oldest girl spoke again. "Soldiers," she said, and even in Spanish, the word carried a weight of fear and hatred. "We ran from soldiers." Jake's blood chilled. If they were escapees from army custody, harboring them wasn't just dangerous, it was illegal. He could hang for it, but looking at them, seeing the bruises, the fear, the desperate gratitude for simple water and food, he couldn't bring himself to care about the law. "How long ago?" he asked. She held up 4 fingers. 4 days. They'd been running for 4 days through some of the harshest territory in Arizona. "My name is Jake," he said, pointing to himself. "Jake Sullivan." The girl hesitated, then pointed to herself. "Maria." It wasn't an Apache name, probably given to her at a mission school or by soldiers. She indicated the youngest, Rosa. Then the middle girl, who was now lying with her head in Maria's lap. Elena. More Christian names. Jake wondered what their real names were, what they called themselves in their own language. But those were questions for later, if there was a later. "You can rest here tonight," Jake said. "It's safe," Maria translated for Rosa, who spoke rapid Apache in response. Maria shook her head firmly at whatever the younger girl had said. "She says we bring death," Maria explained. "Soldiers will come. They always come. Let me worry about that." Jake stood. Decision made. "Can you get Elena to the cabin?" Together, they managed to half-carry Elena to the shelter. Jake gave up his bedroll, spreading it on the floor for the injured girl. In the fading light, he could see that her injuries were serious, a deep gash on her side, poorly bandaged, showing signs of infection. Without proper treatment, she wouldn't last long. As darkness fell, Jake built up the fire outside the cabin, partly for warmth, partly so any watching eyes would see him there, apparently alone. The girls huddled inside, Maria keeping watch while Rosa tended to Elena. Jake's mind raced with the complexity of his situation. He'd bought this land to build a life, not to get involved in the bloody conflict between the army and the Apache, but here they were, 3 young women who'd suffered God knows what at the hands of soldiers who were supposed to represent civilization and order. He thought of Tom Brennan's warning about the spring drawing unwanted attention. Had the girls known about it? Is that why they'd risked coming here? Water sources were life in the desert, known to all who traveled these lands, passed down through generations. Perhaps some Apache grandmother had told them about the spring on what was now Sullivan Land, never knowing it would one day be owned by a white man. Late in the night, Maria emerged from the cabin, moving silent as a shadow. She sat across the fire from Jake, studying him with those dark, intelligent eyes. "Why you help?" she asked again. "We are enemy to your people." Jake poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up toward the star-filled sky. "Are you my enemy? You, personally?" She seemed to consider this. "Soldiers say all Apache are enemy. Soldiers say a lot of things." Jake met her gaze. "I've got eyes. I can see you're just trying to survive, same as me. Your people will kill you for helping us." "Maybe. But that's my choice to make." He paused, then asked, "What happened? At the fort?" Maria's face hardened, and for a moment Jake thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in halting Spanish mixed with gestures, she began to tell their story. They'd been taken in a raid on their village 3 months ago. Not a warrior raid. Their village had been peaceful, trying to follow the treaty, staying on the reservation. But soldiers had come anyway, claiming they were harboring renegades. The men who resisted were shot. The women and children were taken to Fort Buchanan for questioning. Maria's voice broke as she described what came next. The interrogations, the abuses, the death of her mother in custody. She didn't give details, but Jake could fill in the blanks from her silences, from the way her hands clenched into fists. Elena had tried to protect Rosa, the youngest, and had been beaten badly for it, when a sympathetic sergeant had gotten drunk and left a door unlocked 4 nights ago. They'd run, knowing they'd likely die in the desert, but preferring that to what awaited them at the fort. "We carry truth," Maria said, touching her chest. "We saw soldiers kill women, children. They say Apache did it, but we saw, we know. If we live, we tell." Jake understood then. They weren't just escapees. They were witnesses. No wonder the army would be hunting them. A scandal like that could bring down officers, maybe even affect policy back in Washington. 3 Apache girls' word against the U.S. Army wouldn't normally mean much, but if the story got to the right ears, to reformers or newspaper men, "Christ," Jake muttered. He'd thought he was buying a hardscrabble ranch for $35. Instead, he'd bought himself a front-row seat to a moral crucible. A coyote howled in the distance, answered by another, then another. The desert's night hunters were abroad, but Jake wondered if there were other hunters out there too, wearing blue uniforms and carrying government-issue rifles. Following the trail of 3 desperate girls, he looked at Maria, seeing not an enemy, but a young woman who'd endured horrors and still had the strength to protect those younger than herself. "We'll figure something out," he said. "For tonight, you're safe. That's all I can promise. But it's something—" She nodded slowly, something like trust flickering in her eyes. "Jake Sullivan," she said, as if testing the name. "You are different." As she disappeared back into the cabin, Jake settled in for a long night of watching. His simple dream of building a ranch had just become infinitely more complicated. But sometimes, he reflected, a man found his purpose not in what he planned, but in what fate threw across his path. The fire crackled, sending shadows dancing across the adobe walls. Somewhere in the darkness, danger prowled on 2 legs and 4, but for now, in this small circle of light, 3 Apache girls slept under a white man's protection, and Jake Sullivan kept watch. his rifle across his knees and his conscience finally clear. The days that followed blurred together in a routine of careful vigilance and growing trust. Jake had moved his bedroll outside, giving the girls full use of the cabin. Each morning, he'd find fresh rabbit snares set by Maria, who'd revealed an impressive knowledge of desert survival. Rosa, the youngest, had begun to smile occasionally, though she still jumped at sudden sounds. Elena's fever had broken on the third day, thanks to a poultice Maria made from desert plants Jake couldn't identify. It was during these quiet days that the stories began to emerge, shared in fragments around the evening fire. Maria's Spanish improved with use, and she translated Rosa's Apache words, painting a picture of their lives before the soldiers came. "My father was called Standing Elk in your language," Maria said one evening, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "He believed in peace. He said the old ways of raiding were finished, that we must learn to live beside the white man." Her voice turned bitter. "He was in the fields when the soldiers came. They shot him as he ran toward our wickiup, trying to reach my mother." Rosa spoke softly in Apache, and Maria translated. Rosa says her grandmother was a medicine woman. She was teaching Rosa the healing songs. The soldiers, they called her a witch, said she was making warriors bulletproof with her magic. Maria's jaw tightened. She was 70 winters old. She made medicines for childbirth and stomach pain. Elena, still weak but improving, added her own story through Maria's translation. Her brother had been taken to the mission school years ago. When he came back, he could read and write English, but he'd forgotten how to speak to the spirits of the land. He wore white man's clothes and cut his hair. Maria explained, "But it didn't save him. When the soldiers came, they shot him first. Said educated Apache were the most dangerous." Jake listened to these stories, feeling the weight of them settle into his bones. He'd known, in an abstract way, about the violence between his people and theirs, but hearing it from these young women, seeing the pain still fresh in their eyes, made it real in a way that hollowed out his chest. One afternoon, while Jake was repairing the roof and the girls were washing clothes in the spring, he spotted dust on the horizon. His blood ran cold as he recognized the purposeful movement of riders approaching. Military precision in their spacing. "Inside," he hissed to the girls. "Now, stay quiet." They vanished into the cabin like smoke. Jake forced himself to continue working, hammering boards with studied casualness as 4 cavalry soldiers rode up. Their lieutenant, a young man with ambitious eyes and a carefully waxed mustache, surveyed the property with obvious disdain. "Mr. Sullivan, isn't it?" The lieutenant didn't dismount. A calculated insult. "I'm Lieutenant Harrison, Fort Buchanan. We're tracking escaped prisoners, Apache women. 3 of them." Jake wiped sweat from his brow, taking his time. "Haven't seen any Apache, Lieutenant. Been too busy trying to make this place livable." Harrison's eyes narrowed. "These aren't just any Apache, Mr. Sullivan. They're dangerous. Killed a guard during their escape." It was a lie. Jake could see it in the way the sergeant behind Harrison shifted uncomfortably, but he kept his face neutral. "Like I said, haven't seen anyone. Not much water out here for folks on the run?" "Except for your spring," Harrison observed. "Best water for miles around. If I were running, that's where I'd head." "You're welcome to look around," Jake said, gesturing broadly. "Not much to hide behind out here." The lieutenant studied him for a long moment, then nodded to his men. They dismounted and began a search, poking into the scraggly brush, examining the ground for tracks. Jake held his breath as one soldier approached the cabin. "Anything in there?" Harrison called. Jake shrugged. "Broken furniture and pack rat droppings. Help yourself." The soldier peered through the doorway but didn't enter, apparently satisfied by the visible squalor. Jake had counted on military fastidiousness. No soldier wanted to root around in what looked like a pest-infested hovel. After 20 minutes of fruitless searching, Harrison remounted. "Mr. Sullivan, I'll be frank. These women are witnesses to Incidents that could be misunderstood by certain parties back east. Indian lovers in Congress who don't understand the necessities of frontier justice. It would be better for everyone if they were returned to custody. Or silenced. Jake said quietly. Harrison's face flushed. I don't care for your implication. Sir, we are officers of the United States Army, not murderers. Never said you were, Jake replied, just observing that witnesses who don't make it back to custody can't testify about anything. The lieutenant's hand moved toward his sidearm, but the sergeant coughed discreetly. Harrison mastered himself with visible effort. Mr. Sullivan, harboring fugitives is a hanging offense. I'd hate to see a man swing for misplaced sympathies. I'll keep that in mind. Lieutenant. Harrison wheeled his horse around. We'll be patrolling this area regularly. Mr. Sullivan, if these fugitives appear, it would be in your best interest to signal us. A fire at night, 3 shots in the air. There might even be a reward. They rode off in a cloud of dust, but Jake waited a full hour before calling the girls out. They emerged pale and shaken, Rosa clinging to Maria's hand. They'll be back, Maria said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Jake admitted. And next time they might not be so easy to fool. That night, as they sat around the fire, the weight of their situation pressed down on all of them. Elena spoke at length for the first time, her voice stronger now, and Maria translated her words with growing emotion. She says we should leave. We bring danger to you. But... Maria paused, struggling with the translation or perhaps with the emotion behind it. But she also says you are not like the others. You see us as human beings, not animals. She wonders why. Jake stared into the fire, remembering his parents' farm, the family Bible his mother read from every evening. My mother used to say that God made all people in his image. Didn't say nothing about exceptions for skin color or language. He smiled ruefully. Course, plenty of folks back in Texas thought she was soft in the head for teaching our Mexican ranch hands kids to read alongside me. Rosa said something that made Maria laugh. The first time Jake had heard her laugh, it transformed her face, revealing the young woman beneath the weight of tragedy. What did she say? She said your mother must have been Apache in secret, to be so wise. The moment of levity faded as reality reasserted itself. They couldn't stay here indefinitely. But where could they go? The reservation meant certain death if their escape was discovered. Mexico was possible, but it meant crossing even more hostile desert. And the Mexican authorities had their own complicated relationship with the Apache. There's a place, Maria said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. In the mountains, where some of our people still live free, the ones who never surrendered, never went to the reservation. She looked at Jake with those dark, knowing eyes. It is far, very far, and the journey would be dangerous. Jake finished. How far are we talking? 10 days, maybe 12, through the worst country. Places where even the soldiers don't go. Jake did the mental calculations. His supplies wouldn't last that long, not for 4 people. They'd need more food, ammunition, medical supplies for Elena. That meant a trip to town, which meant leaving the girls alone and vulnerable. But the alternative, waiting here for Harrison to return with more men, maybe with Apache scouts who could track better than soldiers, was no alternative at all. I'll need to go to town, he said finally. Get supplies. Can you keep hidden for 2 days? Maria nodded. We know how to be invisible. As if to prove her point, Rosa stood and seemed to melt into the darkness beyond the firelight. Even knowing she was there, Jake could barely spot her. These girls had skills honed by generations of survival in hostile territory. Later, as the fire burned low, Maria asked the question Jake had been dreading. Why do you help us? Truth, this time, not just you need help. Jake was quiet for so long that he thought she might repeat the question. Finally, he spoke. You ever feel like you're living someone else's idea of your life? Like you're following a trail blazed by others, never knowing if it leads where you want to go? Maria nodded slowly. I came out here to build something of my own. Thought it would be a ranch, cattle, maybe a family someday. Normal things. He gestured at the star-filled sky. But maybe what we plan and what we're meant to do ain't always the same thing. Maybe sometimes life puts a choice in front of you, and you either take it or spend the rest of your days wondering what kind of man you really are. And what kind of man are you? Jake Sullivan. He met her gaze across the dying fire. I guess we're about to find out. Rosa materialized from the darkness, settling back beside her sister. Elena murmured something in her sleep, and Maria adjusted the blanket around her. These small gestures of care, a family persisting despite everything they'd endured, struck Jake more powerfully than any words could. We did not ask for this war, Maria said softly. We did not ask to be witnesses, but the spirits have made us so. The truth must be told, even if we die telling it. Nobody's dying on my watch, Jake said firmly. Not if I can help it. Maria studied him for a moment, then spoke in Apache to her sisters. Rosa responded. Then Elena, her voice weak but certain. Maria turned back to Jake. We have decided. We trust you, Jake Sullivan. Whatever comes, we face it together. As the girls retreated to the cabin for the night, Jake remained by the fire, planning. Town tomorrow for supplies. Then the journey north, into the maze of canyons and peaks where the last free Apache held out against the encroaching world. It was madness, probably suicide. His neighbors were right. He was a fool. But for the first time since setting foot on his $35 ranch, Jake Sullivan felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The land might be harsh and unforgiving, the danger real and mounting, but purpose had a way of clarifying things. He thought of Lieutenant Harrison's cold eyes, of the lies that came so easily to his lips. He thought of Maria's father, shot down while running to protect his family. He thought of Rosa's grandmother, labeled a witch for knowing how to heal. He thought of Elena's brother, whose education couldn't save him from bullets. And he thought of 3 young women who carried the truth like a burning coal, determined to see justice done even if it cost them their lives. Cowboy's $35 ranch turns into a nightmare, he murmured, remembering his own bitter words from that first night. But now he wondered if nightmare was the right word. Maybe it was something else, a test, a crucible, a chance to be more than just another failed rancher in a land full of broken dreams. The coyotes howled in the distance, but Jake no longer heard them as threats. They were just fellow creatures trying to survive in a hard world, singing their defiance to the stars. He checked his rifle, banked the fire, and settled in for another night of watching. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers. But tonight, 3 Apache girls slept safely under his protection. And that was enough. That was everything. The ride to Coldwater Springs took Jake through familiar territory, but everything looked different now. Every shadow could hide watching eyes. Every dust cloud might signal approaching riders. He'd left before dawn, telling the girls to stay inside the cabin until his return, to make no fires, leave no sign of their presence. The town sprawled along a single main street, false-fronted buildings standing like tombstones against the desert backdrop. Jake tied Rosie outside Hutchinson's general store and stepped onto the warped boardwalk, acutely aware of how normal he needed to appear. Mrs. Hutchinson looked up from her ledger as the bell above the door chimed. Her sharp eyes took in his dusty clothes, the tension in his shoulders. Mr. Sullivan, survived another week. I see. Yes, ma'am. Need to stock up on supplies. Planning a long trip? Her tone was casual, but Jake caught the probing undertone. Just laying in stores before the real heat hits, he replied, moving through the cramped aisles. He selected carefully. Salt pork, flour, beans, coffee, ammunition. Then, as if an afterthought, he added medical supplies, carbolic, clean bandages, willow bark for fever, Mrs. Hutchinson tallied his purchases, her pencil scratching across brown paper. That's quite a medical kit for a healthy young man. Can't be too careful out there. Cut myself pretty bad working on the cabin last week. She clearly didn't believe him, but seemed disinclined to push. That'll be $12.60. As Jake counted out the money, the store door burst open, Will Brennan strode in, his face flushed with excitement or liquor, possibly both. "Jake Sullivan!" He slapped Jake on the back hard enough to stagger him. "The Hermit of Nowhere Ranch. Come have a drink with me." "I need to get back." "Nonsense. One drink won't kill you. Besides, you need to hear the news." Will's eyes glittered with malicious pleasure. "About them Apache bitches that escaped from Fort Buchanan." Jake's blood chilled, but he kept his expression neutral. "Hadn't heard about any escape?" "Course not. Living out there like a desert rat." Will grabbed Jake's arm, steering him toward the door. "Come on, this calls for whiskey." Short of causing a scene, Jake had no choice but to follow. The Copper Bell Saloon was mostly empty at midday. Just a few hardcore drinkers and a bored bartender. Will commandeered a corner table and signaled for a bottle. "So," Will said, pouring generous shots, "3 Apache women killed a guard and ran off from the fort. Can you believe it? Murdering savages, the lot of them." Jake sipped his whiskey, the lie burning more than the alcohol. "Killed a guard? That's what Lieutenant Harrison says. Course, between you and me." Will leaned in conspiratorially. Whiskey fumes overwhelming. "I heard from a soldier that the guard was drunk, trying to, well, you know. One of them women hit him with a rock, and he fell wrong, cracked his head. But Harrison can't say that, can he? Makes the Army look bad. So he says they murdered him." "Exactly. Smart man. Harrison. Knows how to handle things." Will downed his shot and poured another. "Anyway, they're offering a bounty now. $100 a head, dead or alive." Jake's hand tightened on his glass. $300 is a lot of money. For Apache scalps, I'd do it for free. Will's grin was ugly. "My pa's too soft, says leave it to the Army, but some of us younger men, we're thinking of forming a hunting party." Jim Patterson lost his brother to Apache 5 years back. He's real eager. "When?" "Soon as we get organized. 2-3 days, maybe." Will studied Jake with bloodshot eyes. "You should join us. Prove you're not an Indian lover like some folks are saying." "Who's saying that?" "Oh, you know how people talk. You buying that worthless land, keeping to yourself, not interested in running cattle or farming like normal folks. Some wonder what you're really doing out there." Jake forced himself to finish his whiskey calmly. "Tell anyone who's wondering that I'm trying to build something. Same as any man." He stood to leave, but Will grabbed his sleeve. "Think about joining us, Jake. $300 would buy a lot of improvements for that ranch." "I'll think about it." Jake lied, pulling free. Outside, he took a deep breath of hot, dusty air, trying to clear the whiskey and disgust from his system. A hunting party. In 2 or 3 days. The window for escape was closing fast. "Mr. Sullivan." Jake turned to find Samuel Carson, the town's sole attorney, standing in the shadow of the courthouse. Carson was an oddity in Coldwater Springs, an educated man with principles in a place that valued neither. "Mr. Carson." "Walk with me a moment." It wasn't really a request. They strolled toward the edge of town, Carson's measured pace giving them privacy. "I heard young Brennan's recruitment pitch, barbaric but typical." Jake said nothing. Waiting. "I also heard Lieutenant Harrison visited your ranch yesterday." Carson's pale eyes were keen behind wire spectacles. "Looking for escaped prisoners, I believe. He didn't find any." "No, I don't suppose he did." Carson stopped walking, turning to face Jake directly. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm going to speak plainly. This territory is about to explode. The Army's been covering up atrocities for months. Those 3 women aren't the first to disappear from Fort Buchanan, just the first to escape alive." Jake kept his face carefully neutral. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I believe you're a decent man in an indecent situation." Carson glanced around, ensuring they weren't overheard. "If someone were harboring those women, and I'm not saying anyone is, that person should know there are others who oppose what's happening. Not many, not powerful, but we exist. And if those women have evidence of Army crimes?" Carson's eyes sharpened. "Then they would be in mortal danger, But their testimony, if it reached the right people in Washington, could save lives. There's a federal investigation brewing. Senator Dawson is asking questions the Army doesn't want answered. Jake absorbed this information. Hypothetically, if someone knew where these women were, what would you advise? Get them somewhere safe, quickly, and document everything: names, dates, places. The truth needs more than voices. It needs evidence that can't be silenced. They'd circled back to Main Street. Carson tipped his hat. "Good day, Mr. Sullivan. I hope your ranch proves more successful than people expect." Jake watched the lawyer disappear into his office. Mind racing. An investigation. People in Washington asking questions. Maybe the girl's truth had a chance of being heard after all. But first, they had to survive. He loaded his supplies quickly, aware of eyes watching from windows and doorways. The town felt like a powder keg, fear and hatred waiting for a spark. As he mounted Rosie, someone called his name. Tom Brennan stood outside the blacksmith shop, his weathered face unreadable. "Sullivan, heard my boy was bending your ear. He mentioned forming a hunting party." Brennan spat tobacco juice. "Damn fool. Like we need more blood on this ground." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I've been ranching here since before the treaty. Fought Apache when I had to, made peace when I could. What's happening now? It ain't war, it's something uglier." Your son doesn't seem to share your views. Will's young, full of poison from Harrison and his like." Brennan's eyes bored into Jake's. "A word of advice, son. Whatever you're thinking of doing, do it fast. This country's about to tear itself apart, and men like us, men who try to walk the middle ground, will be the first casualties." Jake nodded, understanding the warning and perhaps the tacit approval beneath it. "Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Don't thank me. Just don't get yourself killed. Waste of a good man and a bad piece of land." The ride back to the ranch felt endless, every mile. Jake expected to see dust clouds signaling pursuit, but he reached his property as the sun touched the western mountains, painting the world blood red. The cabin looked deserted, but as he dismounted, Maria materialized from behind a boulder, rifle in hand. The sight of her, fierce and protective, struck him with unexpected force. "Any trouble?" he asked. Quiet, like graves. She helped him unload the supplies, her eyes widening at the quantity. "This is much food. We leave tomorrow night," Jake told her. "There's going to be a hunting party in a few days. We need to be long gone." Inside the cabin, he found Rosa tending Elena, who looked stronger but still fragile. The young women listened intently as Jake related the news from town, Maria translating for the others. $300, Elena said bitterly in Spanish. "That is what our lives are worth." "Not to everyone," Jake said, thinking of Carson and even Tom Brennan. "There are people who want the truth known. In Washington, men are asking questions. Washington is far away." Maria observed. "Bullets are close." They spent the evening preparing, packing supplies, planning routes, discussing contingencies. Jake sketched a rough map from memory, marking water sources and hidden valleys. Maria added her own knowledge, noting places where her people had sheltered for generations. As night fell, an awkward moment arose. Jake started to head outside to his usual sleeping spot, but Maria stopped him. "No, you need a rest for tomorrow. Take the cabin." "I'm fine outside. You are the only one who knows the white man's trails." She interrupted. "If something happens to you, we all die. Sleep inside. We will watch." It was practical, logical, but sleeping in close quarters with 3 young women went against every propriety Jake had been taught. Maria seemed to read his discomfort. "We are not children. Jake Sullivan. We have seen too much to worry about. How do you say proper behavior?" So Jake spread his bedroll in one corner while the girls took the other side of the small space. The cabin filled with the quiet sounds of breathing, the occasional whisper in Apache. Despite the strangeness of the situation, Jake found himself oddly comforted by their presence. He was almost asleep when Maria's voice came soft in the darkness. "Jake, Why did you not take their money? $300 would make your ranch better. Jake thought about how to answer. My mother used to read from the Bible about 30 pieces of silver. Blood money, she called it. Said it would curse any man who took it. Your mother was wise. What about your mother? Jake asked gently. You mentioned she died at the fort. Silence stretched so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, she was beautiful, could make baskets so fine they held water, knew every plant in the desert, every star in the sky. She sang the old songs even when the missionaries forbade it. Maria's voice caught. At the fort, she would not tell them where our men hunted. They hurt her. For many days, she died singing a war song, cursing them in our language. They did not understand the words, but I did. I'm sorry, Jake said, the words pathetically inadequate. She died strong. That is how I will remember her. And if I die tomorrow or next week or next year, I will die strong too. The truth will be told. Rosa whispered something, and Maria laughed softly. Rosa says you would have made a good Apache warrior. High praise from her. Tell her I'm honored. No, some things do not translate, but she knows. They lapsed into silence. Outside, coyotes called to each other, and an owl hooted from somewhere near the spring. Tomorrow they would begin a journey that might well end in death for all of them. But tonight, in this humble cabin on a $35 ranch, something precious existed. Trust between people who should have been enemies. Unity in the face of injustice. Hope despite overwhelming odds. Jake closed his eyes, thinking of the hunting party forming in town, of Lieutenant Harrison's cold efficiency, of $300 in blood money waiting to be claimed. He thought of his original dream: cattle, prosperity, a normal life. That dream was dead now, killed by the choice to see 3 Apache girls as human beings rather than bounties. But perhaps some dreams needed to die for better ones to be born. As sleep finally took him, Jake's last thought was that his mother would have been proud. In the end, that mattered more than all the ranches and respectability in the territory. Tomorrow, they would run. Tonight, they were family. The pounding on the cabin door came just after midnight, jarring Jake from restless sleep. He grabbed his Colt, gesturing for the girls to stay silent as he approached the door. Sullivan, open up! Lieutenant Harrison's voice, accompanied by the metallic sounds of multiple rifles being readied. Jake's mind raced. They were surrounded. He could hear boots positioning around the cabin. Running was impossible. Fighting meant certain death. He made a split-second decision. Coming, he called out, then whispered urgently to Maria. The root cellar, now! She understood immediately. Helping Rosa and Elena to the hidden trap door Jake had discovered and reinforced during his repairs. It was barely big enough for 3 people, but it would have to do. They disappeared into the darkness below just as Jake kicked dust and a blanket over the entrance. He opened the door to find Harrison backed by 8 soldiers, their faces hard in the lantern light. Lieutenant, bit late for a social call. Harrison pushed past him into the cabin, his men following. We have information that you've been harboring fugitives. Mr. Sullivan, your information is wrong. Jake kept his voice steady as soldiers overturned his few pieces of furniture, scattered his supplies. Really? Harrison picked up a torn piece of fabric from the corner, a strip from one of the girls' dresses Jake had missed. Then explain this, and why you bought enough supplies today to feed a small army. I tear clothes working, and I like to stock up. Long ride to town. Harrison backhanded him without warning, sending Jake stumbling against the wall. Don't insult my intelligence. Mrs. Hutchinson was very helpful about your unusual purchases. Medical supplies for a healthy man living alone? Jake tasted blood, remained silent. Sergeant Mackenzie. Harrison barked. Tear this place apart. Check for hiding spots. The search was thorough and destructive. They ripped apart Jake's bedroll, emptied every supply sack, even pried at the walls looking for hidden spaces. Jake's heart hammered as one soldier neared the corner where the root cellar lay hidden. But the man moved on without noticing the carefully concealed entrance. Nothing, sir. Mackenzie reported after 20 minutes. Harrison's face darkened. "They're here somewhere. I can smell them." "That's quite a talent," Jake said. "Maybe you missed your calling as a bloodhound." This time Harrison's fist caught him in the stomach, doubling him over. "You think this is amusing? Those savages murdered a soldier?" "So I heard," Jake gasped. "Also heard he was drunk and forcing himself on them." "Which version should I believe, Lieutenant?" Harrison drew his pistol, pressing it against Jake's temple. "The version that keeps you alive, Mr. Sullivan." For a long moment, they stood frozen. Jake could hear his own heartbeat, could smell the oil on the gun barrel. Then Sergeant Mackenzie coughed nervously. "Sir, without evidence." Harrison held the position a moment longer, then holstered his weapon. "You're right, Sergeant. We're soldiers, not executioners." He turned back to Jake. "But this isn't over. I'm posting men to watch your property. If those Apache witches show up, we'll know." "Waste of good soldiers," Jake said. "But it's your command." Harrison smiled coldly. "Oh, it won't be a waste. You see, Mr. Sullivan, I know they're coming here. The spring, the isolation, it's perfect. And when they do, we'll be waiting. You've just become bait in my trap." They filed out, leaving chaos behind. Jake waited until the sound of horses faded, then quickly moved the blanket and opened the cellar. The girls emerged, dusty and shaken. Elena was trembling, her recent injuries making the cramped hiding especially hard. "They're watching," Jake told them. "We can't leave as planned." Maria's face was grim. "Then we are trapped." "Maybe, maybe not." Jake's mind worked furiously. "Harrison expects you to come here. He doesn't expect you to already be here. That gives us one advantage." They spent the remaining night hours planning. Jake identified where he thought the watchers would position themselves, likely spots with good views of the approaches to his property. If they could slip out through the blind spots, moving at night. "No," Maria said firmly. "They will expect night movement. Apache always move at night. They think. Then when? Dawn. When soldiers are tired from night watching. When sun is in their eyes from east." She smiled grimly. "My father taught this. Attack when enemy expects peace. Make peace when enemy expects attack." It was a dangerous gamble, but Jake saw the wisdom. Soldiers who'd been watching all night would be less alert at dawn, thinking their quarry would have moved in darkness. They prepared carefully. Jake divided the supplies into 4 packs, keeping them light enough to move fast. He gave Maria his rifle. Keeping only his pistol and knife, she handled the weapon with easy familiarity. "You know how to use that? My father taught me, before missionaries said Apache women should not touch weapons." Her eyes were hard. Missionaries were wrong about many things. As the eastern sky began to lighten, they made ready. Jake had identified a route that would take them through a narrow wash on the eastern edge of his property, hidden from the most likely observation posts. From there, they could reach the foothills in relative safety. "If we get separated," Jake said, "head for Cathedral Rock. It's that formation that looks like spires, about 10 miles northeast. Wait there for one day. If the others don't come, keep going north." They slipped out of the cabin as the first rays of sun painted the mountains. Jake led, moving in a crouch, using every bit of cover. Behind him, the girls moved like shadows, their Apache training evident in their silence. They'd made it halfway to the wash when Jake heard it, the distinctive click of a rifle being cocked. He froze, hand moving to his pistol. "Don't even think about it, Sullivan!" Will Brennan stepped out from behind a boulder, rifle aimed at Jake's chest. 2 other men emerged from hiding, Jim Patterson and a mean-looking drifter Jake didn't recognize. "Will," Jake said calmly, "you're up early. Thought we'd do a little hunting before that damned Harrison scared off all the game." Will's eyes moved to the girls, lingered on Maria. Well, looks like we found us $300 worth of Apache. They're under my protection," Jake said. Will laughed. "Your protection? You're harboring murdering savages. Jake, That makes you a traitor." His eyes glittered with more than greed. "Course, maybe we could work out a deal. That pretty one there, Maria, isn't it? She could be worth more than $100 to the right buyer. Mexico's full of men who'd pay good money for an Apache girl." Jake saw Maria's hand tighten on the rifle, saw the rage flash in her eyes. He stepped slightly to the side, putting himself between Will and the girls. "You'll have to go through me first, if that's how you want it." Will raised his rifle. Several things happened at once. Jake drew his Colt with a speed that had kept him alive in Texas. Maria swung her rifle up, and Tom Brennan's voice cracked like a whip across the morning air. "William, lower that gun." The elder Brennan appeared on horseback, his own rifle across his saddle. His weathered face was granite hard as he looked at his son. "Pa?" Will's voice cracked with confusion. "What are you doing here?" "Stopping you from becoming a murderer." Tom dismounted, keeping his rifle ready. "You boys get on home, now." "But Pa, the bounty." "There's no bounty on murder. Son, these women are leaving, and you're going to let them." Tom's eyes were steel. "Or you'll have to shoot me first." For a terrible moment, Jake thought Will might actually do it. The younger man's face twisted with rage and confusion, the rifle wavering between his father and Jake. "You're choosing them over your own blood." Will's voice was raw. "I'm choosing what's right over what's easy. Something I should have taught you better." Tom's voice carried deep sadness. "Your mother would be ashamed to see what you become." "William." That broke something in Will. He lowered his rifle, tears of rage streaking his face. "You're a fool, old man. The Apache will never stop killing us until we kill them all." "Maybe," Tom said quietly. "But it won't start with these three and this man. Not today. Not on my watch." Will spat in the dust, then wheeled around, gesturing sharply to the other men. They melted back into the rocks, heading for their horses. Tom watched them go, shoulders sagging with the weight of what had just passed between father and son. "You need to move fast," he told Jake. "Harrison's men are about 2 miles west, watching the main trail. I'll create a distraction, give you time to reach the mountains. Mr. Brennan, Don't thank me. Sullivan, I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for the man I used to be, before this land made me hard." He looked at the girls, touched his hat brim. "Ladies, I'm sorry for what my people have done to yours. It don't fix nothing, but it needed saying." Maria stepped forward, studying the old rancher with those penetrating eyes. Then she spoke in clear English, the first time Jake had heard her use the language. "Your heart is good. Tom Brennan, the spirits will remember." Tom's eyes widened in surprise. Then he nodded slowly. "Get going. I'll buy you what time I can." They moved quickly after that, reaching the wash as the sun climbed higher. Behind them, they heard gunshots, Tom Brennan firing into the air, shouting about Apache raiders to the west, drawing Harrison's men away from their escape route. The wash provided good cover but was rough going. Elena stumbled frequently, her strength still limited. Without discussion, Jake lifted her onto his back, carrying her as they picked their way through the rocks. Rosa took Elena's pack without being asked. By midday, they'd reached the foothills. Jake set Elena down in the shade of an overhang, all of them breathing hard from the climb. Looking back, he could see dust clouds in the distance, riders crisscrossing the desert, searching. "We need to go higher," Maria said, scanning the terrain with experienced eyes. "They will bring trackers soon." "Apache scouts," Jake agreed grimly. "Apaches hunting Apaches, Harrison's favorite tactic." Rosa said something sharp in her own language. Maria smiled darkly. "She says any Apache who hunts for soldiers has no soul. They are already dead. They just don't know it yet." They pushed on through the afternoon heat, climbing higher into the mountains. The terrain grew increasingly rugged, perfect for losing pursuers but brutal on Elena. Jake carried her more often than not, his shirt soaked with sweat, legs burning from the effort. As the sun began to sink, they finally reached Cathedral Rock. The formation was even more impressive up close. Towering spires of red rock reaching toward the sky like fingers of some buried giant. More importantly, it offered numerous hiding spots and defensive positions. "We'll rest here tonight," Jake decided. "Build strength for tomorrow." They made a cold camp, no fire to give away their position. As darkness fell, Jake stood watch while the girls huddled together for warmth. The desert spread below them, vast and hostile, dotted with the tiny lights of search parties. Maria joined him on watch, moving silently to sit beside him on the rocks. "Your ranch," she said softly. "You will lose it now." Jake thought of his cabin, probably ransacked by soldiers. His dream of building something lasting, gone. "It was just land," he said. What we're doing, this matters more." "Not all white men would say so." "Maybe I'm not like most white men." She was quiet for a moment. "No," she agreed. "You are not." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. Somewhere in the darkness, men with guns and hatred searched for them. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new challenges. The journey to safety, if safety even existed, stretched ahead like an impossible dream. But for now, they were alive. They were free. And in Jake Sullivan's mind, that was worth more than all the ranches and respectability in the territory. "Tell me about the place we're going," he said. "These free Apache in the mountains." Maria's voice took on a distant quality. "They call themselves the last free people. They live as our grandparents lived, following the old ways. Some say they are ghosts, that they can disappear into the rocks and become invisible. Others say they have powerful medicine that turns bullets to dust." "What do you say?" "I say they are people who choose death over chains. And that is a power stronger than any medicine." Below them, a search party's torches flickered like fallen stars. Jake checked his pistol, counted their ammunition. Not much, but it would have to do. They'd crossed a line today that could never be uncrossed. From now on, they were all fugitives, all enemies of the established order. But as Jake looked at Maria's profile in the starlight, saw the strength and determination there, he felt no regret. Some stands were worth taking, regardless of the cost. His mother had taught him that, reading from her Bible about those who stood against injustice. "We should wake the others soon," Maria said. "Travel in the deep night, when the soldiers sleep." "A few more minutes," Jake said. "Let them rest." She nodded, understanding. These might be the last peaceful moments they'd know for days, weeks, or ever. Jake Sullivan's cowboy ranching dream had indeed become a nightmare. But within that nightmare, he'd found something he hadn't even known he was looking for, a purpose worth dying for, and people worth living for. The stars wheeled overhead, eternal and indifferent, as two unlikely allies kept watch over sleeping innocents, guarding against the darkness that pursued them. The desert transformed into a furnace as they pressed northward, leaving the relative shelter of Cathedral Rock behind. By the fourth day of their flight, water had become more precious than gold. Jake rationed their supply carefully, but the 4 canteens wouldn't last much longer under the brutal sun. Elena rode on Jake's back more often than she walked, her strength fading despite Maria's herbal remedies. Her wound had reopened during their escape, and infection threatened. Jake could feel the fever heat radiating from her body as he carried her across the broken landscape. "There," Maria pointed to a line of green barely visible in a distant canyon. Water, maybe. Maybe was a dangerous word in the desert. Springs could be seasonal, dry by this time of year, or they could be guarded by those who'd claimed them, miners, outlaws, or worse. But they had no choice. The descent into the canyon was treacherous. Loose shale slipped beneath their feet, sending cascades of stone rattling into the depths. Rosa went first, her small frame and sure footing finding the safest path. Maria followed, then Jake with Elena clinging weakly to his back. Halfway down, Jake's foot slipped. He felt himself falling, Elena's weight pulling him backward toward a fatal drop. Then Maria's hand shot out, grabbing his shirt, hauling him back to safety with surprising strength. They stood pressed against the cliff face, breathing hard, hearts racing. Guess we're even now, Jake gasped, remembering how he'd first helped them. Maria almost smiled. Not yet. You saved 3. I saved only 2. They found water at the canyon bottom, a small pool fed by a spring seeping from the rocks. Jake tested it carefully, finding it clear and cold. They drank deeply, filled their canteens, and Maria bathed Elena's wound with the fresh water. We should rest here, Jake suggested, looking at Elena's pale face. No. Maria's voice was firm. Smoke rising from canyon. Someone knows this place. As if to confirm her words, Rosa suddenly tensed, pointing upstream, through the heat shimmer. Jake could make out shapes moving toward them. Riders, coming fast. Go, he said, checking his Colt. I'll hold them off. Maria grabbed his arm. Together or not at all? There was no time to argue. They scrambled for cover among the boulders as 5 riders thundered into view. Not soldiers. Their clothes and manner marked them as civilian bounty hunters, the kind of men who'd kill their own mothers for the right price. Well, look what we found, the lead rider called out. He was a giant of a man with a scarred face and dead eyes. The famous Apache killers and their white protector. Boys, we just struck gold. Jake recognized him. Moses Flint. A bounty hunter so brutal even the army kept him at arm's length. Rumors said he collected Apache scalps like trophies, selling them in Mexico when American authorities wouldn't pay. Let the women go. Flint, Jake called out, knowing it was useless. Your quarrel's with me. Flint laughed. An ugly sound. 300 ahead for them, and probably another 100 for you as a traitor. That's a lot of quarrel, friend. The first shot shattered the canyon's peace. Jake fired carefully, conserving ammunition, while Maria proved she hadn't exaggerated her father's teaching. Her rifle cracked with deadly accuracy, forcing the bounty hunters to seek better cover, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Jake felt the wind of a bullet pass his cheek, saw rock chips explode near Rosa's hiding spot. It was only a matter of time. Then Elena did something unexpected. Weak as she was, she began to sing, a high, keening Apache war song that echoed off the canyon walls. The sound raised the hair on Jake's neck, primal and defiant. Maria and Rosa joined their voices to hers. 3 Apache women singing their death song in the face of enemies. The effect on the horses was immediate. Already nervous from the gunfire, they reared and plowed at the alien sound. One bounty hunter was thrown, hitting the ground hard. Another fought to control his mount as it danced sideways toward the canyon wall. Jake saw their chance. He broke from cover, running in a crouch toward the unhorsed man. They collided in a tangle of fists and desperation. The man was bigger, but Jake was fighting for more than money. He managed to get his hands on the fallen rifle just as Flint turned his gun toward him. The shot that saved Jake's life came from an unexpected direction. A new rifle spoke from the canyon rim, and Flint's gun went spinning from his hand. More shots followed, precise and deadly, driving the bounty hunters back. "Apache!" one of them screamed, and suddenly they were fleeing, spurring their horses desperately downstream. Jake looked up to see figures appearing along both canyon rims. Apache warriors, at least a dozen, moving silent as shadows to positions of advantage. One of them, a lean man with gray streaking his long hair, began the treacherous descent to the canyon floor. Maria lowered her rifle slowly. "The free ones," she breathed. "They found us." The gray-haired warrior reached them, his dark eyes taking in the scene, the wounded Elena, the defensive positions, the spent shells. His gaze lingered longest on Jake, measuring, weighing. "You are the white man who protects Apache women," he said in accented English. "We have been watching." "Watching?" Jake kept his hand near his pistol, unsure if they'd traded one danger for another. "Since you left your ranch, we saw the soldiers, the hunters. Saw you carry the wounded one. Saw you fight for them." He gestured to Maria. "Sing your name. Daughter." Maria spoke in Apache, a formal cadence that Jake recognized as important. The warrior listened, then nodded slowly. "I am Vicente," he said to Jake, "war chief of the Free People. You have earned consideration, but bringing you to our hidden places, this is another matter." "I'll go back," Jake said immediately. "Just take them to safety." Rosa spoke for the first time in English, her voice small but fierce. "No, he's family now." Vicente's eyebrows rose. "The child speaks truth?" He looked at Maria, who nodded firmly. "He has bled for us, carried our sister, lost his land for us. He is no longer white man Jake Sullivan. He is—" She spoke a word in Apache that Jake didn't understand. "One who chooses different," Vicente translated. "A name of honor, but still, the council must decide." They traveled through the night, Vicente's warriors ghosting through terrain that would have stopped cavalry cold. Jake carried Elena until one of the warriors silently took her, cradling her with unexpected gentleness. They climbed impossible paths, squeezed through cracks in cliffs, waded through streams to break their trail. By dawn, they'd reached a high valley hidden in the mountain's heart. Jake's exhausted mind could barely process what he saw. Wickiups scattered among the trees, children playing by a crystal stream, women tending cook fires. It was like stepping back in time to before the wars, before the reservations, before the world changed. An ancient woman emerged from the largest dwelling, her face a map of years and wisdom. She spoke rapidly with Vicente, her sharp eyes never leaving Jake's face. Finally, she approached him. "I am Goyan," she said in surprisingly clear English. "Mother of this band. You bring trouble to our door. White man." "I know," Jake said simply. "I'm sorry." "Sorry?" she cackled. "Sorry feeds no children, stops no bullets. But—" her expression softened slightly. "You also bring my granddaughters home. These three, their mothers were of our band. We mourned them as dead." Jake looked at Maria in surprise. She hadn't mentioned this connection. "We thought no one remained," Maria explained softly. "The soldiers said all were killed or taken to the reservation." "Soldiers lie," Goyan said flatly. "We survive, hidden, few, but free." She studied Jake again. "You will stay until the council meets. Then we decide, friend or enemy, life or death." They gave Jake a small shelter at the edge of camp, close enough to watch, far enough to shoot if necessary. He understood the precaution, even respected it. These people survived by trusting no one outside their band. Maria came to him as the sun set, bringing food and news. "Elena will live. Goyan knows healing, the white doctors do not. Already her fever breaks. That's good news." Jake accepted the bowl of venison stew gratefully. "Maria, you didn't tell me you had family here." "I did not know. We were told." She paused, pain flickering across her features. "When soldiers came to our village, they said this band was destroyed, that we must come to reservation or die alone. My father believed them. I'm glad they were wrong." She sat beside him, watching the camp's evening activities. Children learned traditional games, women prepared food, men tended weapons and discussed the day's scouting reports. It was a community, alive and functioning despite everything against it. "This could be your home," Jake said quietly. "You'd be safe here, all of you." "Safe?" Maria shook her head. "No Apache is safe. Here, reservation, Mexico, all temporary. The white world grows larger, ours smaller. One day, no hidden valleys will remain." "Then what's the answer?" "Truth," she said firmly. "The story must be told. What soldiers did, what they hide. Maybe it changes nothing. Maybe it changes everything. But silence is slow death." That night, Jake lay awake listening to the camp's sounds. Soft voices. A baby crying. Someone playing a flute made of river reed. Normal sounds of life persisting against all odds. He thought of his ranch, probably confiscated by now. His dreams of cattle and prosperity, scattered like dust, but lying there in an Apache camp. Technically a prisoner, but treated as a guest. Jake felt more at peace than he had in years. He'd made his choice back at the ranch when he'd offered water to 3 desperate girls. Everything since had been just following that choice to its logical end. The council would meet tomorrow. They would decide if a white man could be trusted with their most precious secret, the location of their refuge. Jake knew they had every reason to say no, to cast him out or worse. But he also knew that Maria would speak for him, that Rosa would add her fierce support, that even Elena from her sickbed would testify. Would it be enough? Could centuries of betrayal be overcome by one man's actions? Jake didn't know, but as sleep finally took him, he heard again that Apache war song echoing off canyon walls. 3 voices raised in defiance of death. He'd been willing to die for them then. He was willing to die for them now. The stars wheeled overhead. Same stars that had watched his parents' farm, his failed ranch, his desperate flight. But tonight they seemed different. Older, wiser, keeping secrets of their own. Tomorrow would bring answers, one way or another. Tonight, Jake Sullivan slept in the hidden heart of Apache resistance and dreamed of water flowing free through desert stone. The attack came at dawn, shattering the valley's peace with the thunder of horses and rifles. Jake woke to screaming, to Vicente's warriors rushing to defensive positions, to the terrible realization that they'd been found. "Cavalry!" someone shouted in English, and Jake saw them, blue uniforms streaming through the valley's narrow entrance. Lieutenant Harrison at their head, but worse, he saw Apache scouts with them, traders who'd sold their knowledge for army silver. Jake grabbed his Colt and ran toward the main camp. Women and children fled toward pre-planned escape routes up the canyon walls. Warriors took positions behind rocks and trees, their few rifles against many. He found Maria helping evacuate the elderly, her face set with grim determination. "Go with them," Jake urged. "Get to safety." "My place is here," she said, checking the rifle he'd given her. "This is my family's fight." The battle was fierce but hopeless. The soldiers had numbers, ammunition, and the element of surprise. Jake fought beside Vicente's warriors, trying to buy time for the evacuation. He saw men he'd shared meals with fall under army bullets, saw the careful peace of the hidden valley torn apart by violence. Then he spotted Harrison directing troops toward the escape routes where women and children climbed desperately. The lieutenant's intention was clear. No witnesses. No survivors. "Rosa!" Jake saw her helping Elena up the steep path, both girls exposed to the soldiers' aim. Without thinking, he broke cover, running through crossfire toward them. The bullet that found him felt like a hammer blow to his shoulder, spinning him to the ground. But he forced himself up, reaching the girls just as soldiers closed in. He put himself between them and the rifles, his Colt barking defiance. Maria appeared beside him, her rifle speaking with deadly precision. Together they held the narrow trail, bodies shielding Rosa and Elena as they climbed higher. More warriors joined them, understanding that this was the crucial point. If the soldiers reached the escapees, all was lost. "Sullivan," Harrison's voice cut through the gunfire. "Surrender the fugitives, and I'll let you live." "Go to hell, Harrison!" Jake shouted back, then grunted as another bullet grazed his ribs. The tide turned when Vicente led a desperate charge from the flank. The warriors knew every rock, every tree, and used that knowledge mercilessly. Soldiers fell back in confusion, their Apache scouts suddenly reluctant to advance against their own people's fury. But the cost was terrible. Jake saw Vicente fall, shot multiple times but still fighting until his strength gave out. Other warriors lay still among the rocks. The paradise of the hidden valley was becoming a graveyard. "Jake!" Maria's scream made him turn. Harrison himself had circled around, approaching from an unexpected angle. The lieutenant's pistol was aimed at Rosa, his face twisted with cold satisfaction. "The murderers die now," Harrison said, and pulled the trigger. Jake moved without thought, throwing himself in front of Rosa. The bullet meant for her heart punched into his chest instead, dropping him to his knees. Through dimming vision, he saw Maria's rifle swing toward Harrison, saw the lieutenant's eyes widen in the split second before she fired. Harrison fell backward, a red flower blooming on his uniform. His men, seeing their commander fall, wavered in their assault. Someone, the sergeant, Jake thought dimly, called for retreat. The soldiers pulled back, dragging wounded, leaving there dead. Jake found himself on the ground, Maria's hands pressing against the wounds in his chest and shoulder. Her face swam in and out of focus, tears cutting tracks through the dust and gun smoke on her cheeks. "Fool," she said in Apache, then English. "Stupid. Brave fool." "Had to," Jake managed. "Couldn't let him hurt her." Rosa knelt beside him, her young face fierce with an emotion too large for her years. "You saved me. Again." "Worth it," Jake whispered. The world was going gray at the edges, but he fought to stay conscious. There were things that needed saying. "Maria, the truth. Tell them." "I will," she promised. "The whole world will know." Goyen appeared, the ancient woman moving with surprising speed. She examined Jake's wounds with expert hands, barking orders in Apache. Warriors lifted him carefully, carrying him toward the medicine lodge. The next hours, or days, Jake couldn't tell, passed in a haze of fever and pain. He drifted between consciousness and darkness, sometimes hearing voices, sometimes feeling cool hands on his burning skin. Once, he thought he heard his mother singing the hymns of his childhood. Another time, it was Apache voices, chanting in rhythms old as the mountains. When he finally woke fully, sunlight was slanting through smoke hole of a wickiup. His chest was bound with bandages that smelled of herbs. Maria sat beside him, grinding something in a stone bowl. "Welcome back," she said softly. "How long?" 4 days. Goyen says the spirits argued over you. Some wanted to take you, others said your work wasn't finished. She smiled slightly. "The ones who wanted you to stay won, barely. The others, Rosa, Elena, safe. We lost many warriors, including Vicente, but the children survived, the elders survived. We can rebuild." Her face hardened. "Harrison is dead. The soldiers retreated to the fort. They're claiming we ambushed them, that they were on peaceful patrol." "Of course they are." Jake tried to sit up, gasped as pain lanced through him. "Be still. You have 2 bullet wounds and lost much blood. Goyen says you'll live, but only if you stop acting like a fool." "Despite everything," Jake almost laughed. "Seems to be a habit." Maria set aside her grinding, looking at him with those dark, penetrating eyes. "Why? Jake Sullivan, why do you keep saving us? We are not your people, not your responsibility." Jake thought about it, wanting to give her truth. "My mother used to read me a story from the Bible about a man who fell among thieves, was left for dead. His own people passed by. Didn't help, but a stranger, someone who should have been his enemy, stopped, bound his wounds, saved his life. And you are this stranger? Maybe, or maybe," he met her gaze, "maybe I just couldn't stand by and watch anymore. Maybe seeing you 3 by that spring, scared and hurt but still fighting to survive. Maybe that was the moment I understood what kind of man I wanted to be." Maria was quiet for a long moment. Then she leaned down and kissed him. Soft, brief, but carrying the weight of everything unspoken between them. When she pulled back, there were tears in her eyes again, but also something that might have been hope. "The council met while you slept," she said. "They have decided. You are no longer white man Jake Sullivan. You are family, part of this band, if you wish it. And if I do, then you stay. Help us rebuild. Fight beside us." She paused. "Live beside us. The old ways say a warrior who saves a woman's life 3 times has earned the right to court her." Despite his wounds, Jake felt his heart race. "And what does the woman say?" "She says the warrior is a fool." Maria's smile took the sting from her words. "But perhaps the kind of fool the people need." Over the following days, as Jake slowly healed, he learned the full scope of what had happened. The attack on the valley had ironically served their larger purpose. Several soldiers, sickened by orders to fire on women and children, had deserted. One had gone to the territorial newspaper with his story. Combined with the testimonies that Samuel Carson had been collecting, including sworn statements from Maria, Rosa, and Elena about their treatment at Fort Buchanan, A scandal was brewing. The federal investigator arrives next week. Carson himself told them, having made the dangerous journey to the Hidden Valley. Senator Dawson is demanding answers. The War Department is in uproar. Harrison's death is being investigated. Seems several of his own men are willing to testify about his excesses. Will it matter? Jake asked. Still weak, but able to sit up now. Maybe not. But it's a start. The truth is harder to bury when brave people insist on telling it. Carson looked at the three Apache girls. Your testimony will be crucial. Are you willing? Maria translated for her sisters. Elena, fully recovered now, spoke firmly in Apache. Rosa added her own fierce agreement. We will speak, Maria told Carson. In federal court, in Washington if needed. The world will know what happened to our people. It'll be dangerous, Carson warned. There are those who'd rather see you dead than testifying. Then Jake will protect us, Rosa said in her improving English. He is very good at it. They all laughed at that. Even Jake, though it hurt his healing chest. Plans were made. Carson would arrange safe passage for the girls to testify. Federal marshals, not army, would provide protection. The Hidden Valley would be kept secret, officially. The girls would be listed as coming from the reservation. But first, there was healing to do. Jake grew stronger daily under Goyen's care and Maria's constant attention. He learned some Apache words, participated in the camp's daily life as much as his wounds allowed. The people, initially suspicious, gradually accepted him. He'd bled for them, literally. That carried weight. One evening, as the sun painted the canyon walls gold and red, Maria found him by the stream. He was finally strong enough to walk without help, though his chest still ached with each breath. Regrets? She asked, sitting beside him on a smooth boulder. Jake looked around, at the camp rebuilding itself, at children playing despite recent trauma, at warriors standing guard, ever vigilant. He thought of his ranch, probably sold to someone else by now. His dreams of normalcy, respectability, an ordinary life. No, he said honestly. No regrets. Your people will call you traitor, Indian lover. Worse things. Let them. He took her hand, marveling at its strength and grace. I know who I am now. Took me long enough to figure it out. She leaned against his uninjured shoulder. One who chooses different. The name suits you. What happens after? Jake asked. After the testimony, the investigation, we survive. Maria said simply. We tell our stories. We protect what's ours. We live. She looked up at him. Together, if you're willing. I'm willing. As darkness fell, they walked back to camp hand in hand. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The fight for justice would be long, possibly futile. The Hidden Valley might not stay hidden forever. The world was changing, and not always for the better. But tonight, Jake Sullivan sat by an Apache fire, surrounded by people who'd become family, next to a woman who'd become everything. His shoulder bore the scars of bullets taken for others. His heart bore the deeper scars of choosing love over law, justice over safety, humanity over the easy prejudices of his time. Cowboy's $35 ranch turns into a nightmare, he murmured, remembering his bitter words from what seemed a lifetime ago. Maria heard him, squeezed his hand. No, she corrected. Cowboy's $35 ranch turns into a different dream, better dream. Jake looked at her, fierce, beautiful, unbroken despite everything, and knew she was right. Some dreams had to die for better ones to be born. Some men had to lose everything to find what really mattered. The stars came out, same stars that had watched over his desperate flight, his choices, his transformation, but now they seemed like allies, fellow witnesses to the truth that needed telling. Tomorrow, the fight would continue. Tonight, Jake Sullivan was home. The federal courthouse in Tucson stood like a fortress of justice against the territorial sky. Jake adjusted his new suit, bought with money from the sale of his rifle, one of his few remaining possessions, and watched as Maria, Rosa, and Elena climbed the steps beside him. 6 months had passed since the attack on the valley. 6 months of preparation for this moment. Remember, Samuel Carson said quietly, tell the truth, simply and clearly. Let them see who you really are. Federal Marshal Thomas McKenna, a gruff but fair man from Illinois, led their protective detail. Unlike the local army, he'd treated the girls with respect from the start. Anyone tries anything in my courthouse? He'd growled. They'll answer to federal law. The courtroom was packed. Jake saw familiar faces. Mrs. Hutchinson from the general store, her expression unreadable. Tom Brennan, looking older, grayer, sitting apart from his son Will. Soldiers in uniform. Some who'd been at the Valley, their faces hard with resentment. And in the back, members of the press, pencils ready to record history. The federal investigator, Judge William Thornton, commanded the room with quiet authority, a Lincoln appointee. He'd built a reputation for integrity that even his enemies respected. He listened intently as Maria took the stand first, her English clear and precise as she described the raid on their village, the deaths of innocents, the imprisonment at Fort Buchanan. They said we harbored hostiles, Maria testified. But our men were in the fields, farming as the treaty required. When they ran to protect their families, soldiers shot them down like dogs. The Army's lawyer, Major Phillips, tried to shake her story. These events happened during wartime, did they not? When Apache raiders were killing settlers throughout the territory. What war? Maria's eyes flashed. We were at peace. We followed the treaty. Our crime was existing on land the white men decided they wanted. Rosa testified next, her youth making her words even more powerful. She described her grandmother's death, the old woman's only weapon the healing herbs in her pouch. Elena, still fragile but determined, told of her brother's murder, how education and adoption of white ways hadn't saved him. Then came the hardest part, describing their treatment at Fort Buchanan. The room grew silent as Maria, translating for her sisters when needed, outlined the systematic abuse, the interrogations designed to break them, the deaths of women and children in custody. Objection. Major Phillips stood. These are unsubstantiated allegations against officers who cannot defend themselves. Because they're dead? Judge Thornton's voice was dry. Sit down, Major. The witnesses will be heard. Jake testified last, describing finding the girls, the pursuit by Lieutenant Harrison, the attack on the Valley. He didn't minimize his own role or claim heroism. He simply told what he'd seen, what he'd chosen, and why. Mr. Sullivan, Major Phillips cross-examined. You gave up your land, your future, possibly your life for these Apache women. Why? What did you hope to gain? Jake met his gaze steadily. Nothing. I hope to gain nothing except maybe being able to sleep at night knowing I'd done right. So, you admit to harboring fugitives? To taking up arms against the United States Army? I admit to protecting 3 scared girls who'd done nothing wrong except be born Apache. If that's a crime, then yes, I'm guilty. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Thornton called for order. The testimony continued for 3 days. Soldiers who'd participated in the Valley attack were called, some confirming the orders to fire on women and children, others claiming they'd only followed commands. The deserter who'd gone to the press, Private Daniel Morrison, testified despite obvious fear of retribution. I joined the Army to protect people, Morrison said, his voice shaking but determined. Not to murder children because they were born with the wrong color skin. On the 4th day, Judge Thornton delivered his preliminary findings. The courtroom held its breath as he spoke. The evidence presented here paints a deeply troubling picture of military conduct in this territory. While I understand the complexities of frontier defense, nothing justifies the systematic targeting of peaceful Indians, the abuse of prisoners, or the murder of non-combatants. He looked directly at the military representatives. I will be recommending immediate changes to Army protocols regarding Indian prisoners. Furthermore, several officers will face court-martial for their actions, posthumously in Lieutenant Harrison's case. Then his gaze found Jake. As for Mr. Sullivan, While technically guilty of harboring fugitives, I find his actions represent the best of American values, protecting the innocent, standing against injustice regardless of personal cost. No charges will be filed. The courtroom erupted. Some cheered. Others shouted protests. Jake felt Maria's hand find his, squeezing tight. Outside, in the harsh Tucson sunlight, they stood together as reporters clamored for statements. But it was Tom Brennan who approached first, hat in hand. "Sullivan," he said gruffly, "I came to say, what you did took courage, real courage. I was wrong about you." He looked at the girls. About a lot of things. Will stood behind his father, unable to meet Jake's eyes. But he managed to nod once before turning away. Not forgiveness, perhaps, but acknowledgement. Samuel Carson joined them, smiling broadly. "This is just the beginning. The report will go to Washington. Changes will come. Slowly, perhaps. But they'll come." "And us?" Maria asked. "What happens to us now?" Jake had been thinking about that for weeks. "I've been talking to Carson. There's land available up north, near the Colorado border, far from the wars, the hate. We could start fresh." "We?" Maria's eyebrow raised. "If you'll have me." Jake took a breath. "I know it's not conventional. A white man and an Apache woman. There'll be those who never accept it, but—" Maria silenced him with a kiss. There in front of the courthouse, in front of everyone, when they broke apart. Rosa was grinning and even Elena smiled. "Is that a yes?" Jake asked, dazed. "That's a, you talk too much," Maria replied. "Of course yes." They were married a week later in a small ceremony. Judge Thornton himself presided, with Carson as witness and Rosa and Elena as Maria's attendants. The Hidden Valley sent gifts, beautifully woven baskets, turquoise jewelry, a warrior's blessing for Jake from the new chief. The land near Colorado proved perfect, a small ranch with good water, far from the conflict still raging further south. Jake built a real house this time, with Maria's help and design. Rosa and Elena lived with them, continuing their education through Carson's connections, preparing to be voices for their people in the changing world. Years passed. The Indian Wars continued, tragic and brutal. But small changes came too. Military protocols shifted. Investigations followed abuses. It wasn't enough. Would never be enough to undo the damage. But it was something. Jake and Maria had children, 3 boys and 2 girls who grew up speaking both English and Apache, comfortable in both worlds. Rosa became a teacher, working at the Indian school but teaching truth alongside the required curriculum. Elena married a good man from the Hidden Valley, their wedding a blend of traditions that would have seemed impossible years before. On quiet evenings, Jake would sit on the porch of the house he'd built with Maria, watching their children play in the yard. His shoulders still ached where Harrison's bullets had struck, a permanent reminder of choices made, but he wore those scars proudly. Maria would join him, older now, but still fierce, still beautiful. They'd watch the sun set over their land, not a $35 nightmare, but a hard-won dream. "Do you ever think about how different life would have been?" Maria asked one such evening. "If you'd just ridden past that day?" Jake pulled her close. "Every day, and every day I'm grateful I didn't." Their eldest son, named Vicente after the fallen war chief, came running up. "Papa, tell us the story again." "About finding Mama and Aunt Rosa and Aunt Elena?" "Again," Jake laughed. "You've heard it 100 times. Please." The other children joined the chorus. So Jake told it again. The story that had become family legend. How a failed rancher bought a piece of worthless land for $35 and found something worth more than all the gold in California. How 3 Apache girls changed one stubborn cowboy's life. How love and justice could bloom even in the harshest desert. As the stars came out, the same eternal witnesses to all human struggles. Jake Sullivan looked at his family, Apache and white, traditional and modern, living proof that different worlds could meet in peace. His mother would have been proud. The ones who'd died, Vicente Standing Elk, Rosa's grandmother, they would have been proud too. The frontier was changing, not always for the better. The Apache would face more trials, more losses, but here on this ranch, in this moment, hope lived. The truth had been told and heard. Justice, imperfect but real, had been served. And love, complicated, difficult, revolutionary love, had triumphed over hate. "Papa," his daughter asked sleepily, was it really a nightmare, the $35 ranch? Jake looked at Maria, at their children, at the life they'd built from the ashes of that first failed dream. "No, little one," he said softly. "It was the beginning of everything." As the family went inside, Jake paused on the threshold, looking back at the vast desert sky. Somewhere out there, his old ranch stood empty, probably, somewhere. Soldiers still chased shadows, somewhere. Apache still fought for their freedom. But here, now, was peace. Here was home. Here was the future, messy and uncertain but bright with possibility. The Cowboy's $35 ranch had indeed become something unexpected. Not a nightmare after all, but a love story written in blood and tears and triumph. Proof that sometimes the worst purchases lead to the richest rewards. The door closed softly on the desert night, but the story lived on, in courthouse records, in newspaper archives, in the memories of those who'd witnessed it, and most of all, in the lives of those who'd lived it. Jake Sullivan had bought a failed ranch for $35. What he'd found was priceless. Thank you for listening to this story from the Wild West, where love and justice bloomed in the harshest conditions. Where are you enjoying this tale from? Please share your location in the comments so we can connect with fellow listeners around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Jake and Maria's journey. What touched your heart most in this story of courage across cultures? We'd love to hear from you.